I'm Dr. Paul Offit, pediatrician and professor of pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. I'm here today to answer your questions from the internet. This is Vaccine Support. Happy Brit 17 asks, you do realize a lot of what we get vaccinated for, our immune system could just fight off naturally. People love the word natural. There's nothing good about a natural infection. Mother Nature's been trying to kill us ever since we crawled out of the ocean onto land. I was a child of the 1950s. I had measles, I had mumps, I had German measles, I had chickenpox, and I survived every one of those infections. But not everybody did. Before there was a measles vaccine in 1963, every year, 48,000 children would be hospitalized with severe pneumonia or dehydration or inflammation of the brain, which could leave those children then blind or deaf. Mumps was the most common cause of acquired deafness. Rubella or German measles, when it infected pregnant women, would cause about 20,000 cases of congenital birth defects every year, manifested as blindness, deafness, or permanent heart defects. I was lucky I wasn't one of those 75 to 100 children who died every year from chickenpox, or the 10,000 who were hospitalized. So while many of us are able to survive a natural infection, some aren't. In fact, I actually don't like the term natural immunity. I prefer the term survivor immunity. Ravo93 asks, has herd immunity ever been achieved without a vaccine? Herd immunity means a critical percentage of people around you have been vaccinated and are protected, so much so that it's very hard for that virus or bacteria to get to you. Also remember, millions of people in this country can't be vaccinated because they're immune compromised. They can't be vaccinated because they have cancer. They depend on us to protect them, and they count. So herd immunity is important. But has a virus or bacteria ever been eliminated by natural infection? No. Smallpox, which was estimated to kill about 500 million people, was never eliminated until there was a vaccine. Polio in the United States would every year cause tens of thousands of children to be paralyzed and thousands to die. That was eliminated in 1979 because of a vaccine. So only vaccines have the capacity to eliminate these viruses. Herd immunity won't do it. In 2014, 2015, there was a measles outbreak that started in Southern California. It then spread to other states. It affected hundreds of people. Richard Pan was a state senator in California that was embarrassed that his state had been the epicenter of this outbreak. So he wanted to eliminate the philosophical exemption to vaccination in a state that never had a religious exemption. If he was successful, that would have meant that the only exemptions in California were medical exemptions. The anti-vaccine activists hated this, and they showed up in droves to decry this particular attempt to eliminate the philosophical exemption for vaccination. There was a little boy who showed up at those meetings. He had leukemia, and so he would stand up at those meetings, and they would have to put him on a stool because he didn't reach the microphone. And he would say his name, I have leukemia, I can't be vaccinated. I depend on you to protect me. Don't I count? And he stared right at these anti-vaccine activists when he said it. He was a brave little boy, and he had everything to do with how it came to be that California now only has a medical exemption to vaccinations. Only the children are brave, and women. Children are women. Forget us. Lefty Maddie asks, how do you deal with anti-vaccine parents? First of all, I think it's reasonable to be skeptical of anything you put into your bodies, including vaccines. I think I would divide this group up into two. One are parents who just are scared. They read things that are frightening on the internet. Are vaccines causing cancer or heart disease or autoimmune disease? Is that possible? And those people have questions, and you just try the best you can to answer those questions and not to in any sense deny their fear. Their fear is real, and you can't sort of deny it by just saying, well, that's silly. You have to accept that that is a real fear and that you have to try and provide them with information that calms that fear down. The second group of parents, and this is a much smaller crowd, are people who just think there's a conspiracy to sell vaccines. They think you're part of that conspiracy. And there's really nothing you can say to make them feel better about this because they think you're just an instrument for the pharmaceutical industry. I usually don't spend a lot of time talking to those folks because there's no point wasting their time and mine. Kirko asks, how was the smallpox vaccination campaign so effective that the disease was completely eradicated when the smallpox vaccine had very real side effects? So there are two different kinds of viruses. There's viruses that have short incubation periods, like 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. SARS-CoV-2, the cause of COVID, rotavirus, influenza, respiratory syncytial virus has short incubation periods. Then there's the long incubation period diseases, German measles or chickenpox or smallpox. You can eliminate those diseases. You don't need antibodies in the circulation at the time you're exposed. All you need is memory cells, which have plenty of time to become activated and make antibodies well before you get get sick because it's a long incubation period. So you can eliminate smallpox, which we did by 1980. You can eliminate polio from this country, which we did by 1979. You can eliminate measles, which we did from this country by 2000. You will never eliminate rotavirus or SARS-CoV-2 or RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, or flu because they are short incubation period diseases. That's one critical difference. And I think we could have done a better job of explaining that actually regarding the COVID vaccine, because while COVID vaccine will protect against severe disease, which is the goal, it's never going to protect against mild or moderate disease for long. So the smallpox vaccine certainly had real side effects. And smallpox vaccine could occasionally cause fatal side effects, it's true, but smallpox was a feared and devastating illness. One of the reasons we were able to eliminate it is there's no such thing as asymptomatic smallpox. Everybody who has smallpox will have lesions or blisters on their face, and with that, you can kind of put a moat around the virus, meaning not only the person who has it, but the person who they had contact with. And that's why you can essentially eliminate that. Umu Aw asked, to the doctors on the timeline, what is the purpose of all the vaccines babies are given? Polio, rotavirus, etc. Vaccines are given to prevent diseases that cause children to suffer or be hospitalized or die. And when they are introduced, those diseases are rampant. Polio, for example, in the 1950s caused as many as 58,000 children to be paralyzed and 1,800 to die every year. Because of the polio vaccine, we eliminated polio in 1979. So you could ask, why do I still need this vaccine? Polio is gone from this country. Well, it's not gone from this world. And if you choose to lower immunization rates, it'll come back. And that happened in 2022 to a 27-year-old man in Rockland County, New York, who never left this country, who was paralyzed by polio. And that virus that paralyzed him really only paralyzes 1 in every 2,000 people it infects. So he was the tip of a much bigger iceberg. And indeed, you found the virus that infected him in wastewater samples where he lived, which is in Rockland County, New York. You found it in surrounding counties. And if you looked in Philadelphia or you looked in Chicago and looked in the wastewater there, you would also find this virus. We eliminated measles from the United States by the year 2000. Eliminated it. Gone. Nonetheless, this past year, we've had thousands of cases of measles. We've had 3 people die, including 2 children die. So I think if we let our guard down, these viruses will come back. I think we ask a lot of parents in this country. We ask them to give vaccines to prevent 14 different diseases in the first few years of life. That can mean as many as 5 shots at one time to prevent diseases most people don't see, using biological fluids most people don't understand. I think that people are pushing back against vaccine makes sense. I'm a child of the 50s. I had many of these diseases. I had measles, I had mumps, and for about 6 weeks, I was in a polio ward in suburban Baltimore. So I know what these diseases look like. But my children are children of the 90s. They don't see these diseases, and they didn't grow up with these diseases. And the same is true for young physicians. And so I think we have to be much better at compelling people for why it is still important to get vaccines, because if we don't, these diseases will come back, as we're seeing with measles today. A Reddit user asks, who came up with the idea that vaccines could cause autism? There was a British gastroenterologist named Andrew Wakefield who published a paper in a respected medical journal claiming that children who were otherwise healthy got a combination measles, mumps, rubella, or MMR vaccine, and that they developed autism. Now, it wasn't really a study. It was really a case series of 8 children who had received the vaccine and then developed signs and symptoms of autism. So he hypothesized that maybe the vaccine had done it. Now, he might as well have published a study of 8 children who had eaten recently a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and then developed signs and symptoms of autism, because there really was no biological mechanism that made sense for why that would be true. Now, since that paper came out in 1998, there have been 24 separate studies costing millions and millions of dollars trying to answer the question, were you at greater risk if you had gotten the MMR vaccine of developing autism than if you never got that vaccine? And all the studies have shown exactly the same thing. The MMR vaccine doesn't cause autism. But he scared people. And while it's very easy to scare people, it's hard to unscare them. And I think still that false notion that vaccines could cause autism exists. So KDS Burner asks, why do we need boosters for some vaccines and not others? Well, some vaccines are better able to induce an immune response more quickly. The measles vaccine, which was first invented in 1963, worked very well actually as a single-dose vaccine. There were outbreaks in the late 1980s that resulted in hospitalizations, about 160 deaths, and that necessitated then a second dose. But if you looked at those outbreaks, they were in people who never got vaccinated. I think if we just had a single dose and everybody got it, we'd have been fine. Other vaccines, for example, like the hepatitis B vaccine, or just a single protein. And with that, you really need more doses to induce an immune response. So it really depends on the nature of the vaccine to determine whether or not you need a booster or not. Bees Your Uncle asks, where are vaccine memories stored? When you get a vaccine, you make antibodies, and those antibodies are in your circulation, your bloodstream, and they're there to protect you when you're exposed then to a virus or a bacteria. Usually 4 to 6 months later, those antibodies in your bloodstream fade. But you have memory cells, called B cells, for example, that can make antibodies when stimulated. So when you're then exposed, even though the antibodies may not be there in your circulation, you still have these memory cells that often are lifelong. Those memory cells become activated, they make antibodies that can protect you. So memory is really what protects us. Funbox304 asks, vaccination, is postponing bad? It's hard to watch a child get laid down and get 5 shots at once. And it's easy to understand how a parent could say, I'm happy with getting vaccinated, but just don't give them all at one time. Maybe have 1 or 2, and we'll just delay it and space them out. All delaying a vaccine does is it increases the period of time during which you're susceptible to infections. Some parents could argue, but isn't it more stressful to get 5 shots than, say, just to get 1 shot? And the answer is no, actually. There were studies done showing that if you look at cortisol secretion in a child that gets 1 shot versus 2 shots or more, it's the same. Or said another way, you're maximally stressed out at 1 shot. So why just have more visits and delay it when you're not in any way helping a child? So Cruxsucks asks, where does the medicine go when you get an injection or a shot? So when you get an injection, say with the measles vaccine, what happens is the virus reproduces itself and then travels to a local draining lymph node under your arm, for example. And there it's taken up by immune cells that process it and present it to the immune system to induce an immune response. The broccoli offensive asks, yes, the old, y'all gonna get microchipped statement. So you can inject microchips, but microchips are too big to fit through a needle that is used for vaccines. And there's a picture here that clearly shows the size of a microchip needle and compares it to the size of a vaccine needle. And you can see that it's dramatically different. Apathetic Onion asks, why does administering a vaccine to a sick person not cure an existing infection? Vaccines work to prevent infection, not treat it. Now, there are some vaccines that can be given after someone's been exposed to the virus. Some viruses have very long incubation periods. Incubation period means from the time when you're first exposed to the virus to when you develop symptoms. So, for example, rabies. Once you've already developed symptoms, there really is no vaccine that then prevents further progression of that disease. When you're infected, the virus reproduces itself more and more and more. In response, your body makes an immune response. And so as the body makes an immune response, the virus starts to reproduce itself less and less. It's the immune response that causes the symptoms. So that by the time you already have those symptoms, it's really too late to do anything about the virus to make a difference. Parallel Pain asks, vaccines predate the germ theory. So how did doctors think vaccines worked? So the germ theory was born in the late 1800s when we realized that specific bacteria, in this case anthrax, could cause a specific disease. Robert Koch was the name of the person who did that. But nonetheless, if you look at the smallpox vaccine, that was developed before the germ theory. So how did Edward Jenner develop a smallpox vaccine when he didn't know anything about the germ theory? It was really just pure phenomenology. He noted that women who milked cows would get these blisters on their hands. He thought, okay, well, if these milkmaids are getting blisters on their hands and then they're not getting severe smallpox, then I'm going to just take that blister, drain it, and then inoculate it into people and see if it protects them as well. Edward Jenner would take a drop of this pus from someone who had cowpox, and then he would take the needle and he would inject that pus under the skin. Essentially, Jenner's vaccine, which was developed in 1798, is pretty much the same smallpox vaccine that we used up until today. We eliminated smallpox from the world by the year 1980. This was a virus that killed 500 million people. About 1 out of every 3 people who were infected with smallpox died, and many were left blind. White Lightning asks, have been told that the mRNA vaccine leaves the body completely after 2 weeks, leaving antibodies. My question is, where does it go? Do you pee it out and it ends up in the water supply? Just curious. The COVID vaccine was a messenger RNA vaccine. So we all have messenger RNA in our bodies. Those messenger RNA strands are used to make the enzymes and proteins necessary for life. Your messenger RNA is then translated to these proteins, and within a few days, the messenger RNA disintegrates and ultimately leaves the body primarily through the urine. Divining Dad asks, why do so many people claim that the COVID vaccine killed people? The mRNA COVID vaccines could cause, rarely, about 1 in 50,000, something called myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle. It was transient, it was self-resolving, it was short-lived. The virus itself, so-called SARS-CoV-2 virus, could cause severe and occasionally fatal myocarditis. So that wasn't the vaccine. I think people understandably have a distrust of the pharmaceutical industry, which has acted at times unethically and aggressively and illegally. But there is no hiding in the world of vaccines. If a pharmaceutical company, for example, misrepresented or omitted data to the FDA about their vaccine, you very quickly would know that because of something called the Vaccine Safety Data Link, which is a linked, computerized medical record system that involves about 10% of the U.S. population, about 500,000 children. So when a vaccine rolls out, you very quickly know who's gotten a vaccine and who hasn't. So if there is a side effect that's rare, you'll know it, and you'll know it within weeks. Lost on of Pluto asks, the flu vaccine has been available as a nasal mist for some time now, but what's stopping other vaccines from becoming available via this method? It's certainly easiest to give vaccines as a shot. A flu mist is a vaccine that's given as a nasal spray. There are acids and proteases in the upper respiratory tract that can break down viruses, so it's not easy. The only oral vaccines that we had were for the polio vaccine, but polio is an intestinal virus. So polio normally reproduces itself in the intestine. It lives in sewage. Therefore, you can just give it by mouth and it survives the acids in the stomach. The same thing with rotavirus. Rotavirus is another intestinal virus. And so you can give that vaccine by mouth, and that vaccine has been given by mouth since 2006. Paxtacum 8 asks, noob question about virus, why there is no vaccine for HIV or any sexually transmitted disease. So there are 2 sexually transmitted diseases for which there are vaccines. One is the human papillomavirus vaccine, which is sexually transmitted and can cause anal, genital, and head and neck and cervical cancers. And then the other sexually transmitted disease is hepatitis B virus. That vaccine has been around since 1981. The problem with human immunodeficiency virus is it continues to mutate in your body during a single infection. So although you make antibodies to human immunodeficiency virus that could neutralize the virus is constantly moving away from your immune system. So even though HIV was recognized as the cause of AIDS in the early 1980s, and the hope was that we would be able to make a vaccine within a few years, it's been more than 40 years and we haven't been able to make a vaccine. That is a moving target, and that's why HIV has been so hard to conquer. Circle of Mamas asks, why is so much aluminum in vaccines okay? I don't understand how this gets a pass. Aluminum adjuvants have been in vaccines since 1926. By having an adjuvant in a vaccine, that allows you to give fewer doses of that vaccine and lesser quantities of the vaccine itself. And it's necessary for certain vaccines like the hepatitis B vaccine. So there's 7 different vaccines that are given to infants and young children that contain aluminum adjuvants. Aluminum is the 3rd most abundant element on the Earth's surface. We encounter and manage far more aluminum in the food that you eat and the water that you drink than you ever get from vaccines. In fact, if you look in the blood of people who receive vaccines, you can't in any way correlate that with their vaccine history. They still have roughly the same amount of aluminum in their blood and in their hair. So assuming you live on this planet, you're going to be exposed to far more aluminum from living here and eating the food and water and drinking the water than you would ever get from a vaccine. I am here to bore you asks, so did the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID virus leak from a lab or not? The SARS-CoV-2 virus was an animal to human spillover event that occurred in the southwestern section of the Hunan wholesale seafood market. The reason that this notion that a lab leak exists is because the Chinese government basically killed all the animals in that seafood market very early on. Plus, they didn't allow for international scientists to come and evaluate what was going on. Now, SARS-1, on the other hand, which also was an animal-to-human spillover event that occurred in Foshan, China, they didn't kill the animals then. So people could come in and see that, for example, raccoon dogs could be that intermediary between a bat and a human that allowed the virus then to enter the human population. But the reason we know is because although they killed the animals, there was still genetic evidence for that virus in that stall. All the early cases really emanated from that central stall and then spread from there. The Wuhan Institute of Virology was 9 miles away and had nothing to do with this virus spreading. The reason that this has survived is it's more interesting, it's more compelling, that there were evildoers, and it also makes it seem like it's more controllable, because probably 70% of the viruses and bacteria that we're infected with were animal to human spillover events, which is much less controllable. And in fact, now with sort of deforestation, we live in closer and closer association to bats than we ever did before. King of Damnation asks, is it true that you get 72 vaccines? No, I'm not sure where the number 72 came from. Someone made it up. You get vaccines to prevent 17 different diseases in the first 18 years of life. That can mean typically as many as 33 inoculations during that period of time, depending on sort of your uptake of COVID vaccine or yearly flu vaccines. Mirand1 asks, what does it take to develop a vaccine, and why does it take so long? If you see a virus, for example, that's circulating, that's causing serious disease in this country and this world, now you know that this is something worthy of preventing. So the first thing you do is you work with experimental animals, like mice, and you have an idea for how you want to make that vaccine. Let's say you want to take the virus and weaken it, or you want to take the virus and kill it. You're trying your strategy in these experimental animals to see whether it works. Then you go to phase 1 studies, where now you try your strategy in people to see whether or not it seems to induce an immune response which is protective, and that at least it's safe in a few dozen people. Okay, so now you think you've got it. You think you know the number of doses. You think you've got the right strategy. You think you've got the right buffering agent, the right stabilizing agent. And so you go to phase 2 studies, which usually involves hundreds of people. If that works, and you found at this point that at least the vaccine doesn't cause common side effects, then you go to the definitive trial, the so-called phase 3 trial, which is a prospective placebo-controlled trial, typically of tens of thousands of people, to show that the vaccine works and that it doesn't have any uncommon side effects. Then you submit that to the Food and Drug Administration, which usually takes about 10 months to license it. Then that goes to the CDC, which then recommends the vaccine or doesn't. And that takes time. So I was fortunate enough to be part of the team at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia that created the rotavirus vaccine. We did all of that, and it took roughly 26 years to do it. How come it took 26 years to make the rotavirus vaccine, but it took only 11 months to make a COVID vaccine? And the answer is Operation Warp Speed. It took the risks out of it for pharmaceutical companies. Now you could do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. You could build a building. You could make hundreds of millions of doses. And if it didn't work, then you could just throw it all away at no cost to the company. That doesn't work that way normally, and that's why it was so fast. Frankly, I think Operation Warp Speed was one of the greatest medical or scientific achievements in my lifetime. Ornery Blonde asks, what are vaccination schedules based on? Usually vaccines are given before someone would likely be infected with a virus or bacteria. So children are inoculated at 2 months, 4 months, or 6 months of age to protect them against diseases that would likely occur between 6 months and 24 months of age. So for example, the human papillomavirus vaccine, which is designed to protect against a sexually transmitted disease, isn't given in infancy. It's given in adolescence at a time before people are likely to have sex. Geek Sums Me asks, curious minds want to know, how does getting multiple vaccines at once affect the efficacy? When a vaccine is added to the immunization schedule, you have to prove that if it's going to be added to the schedule, it doesn't interfere with existing vaccines, and that those existing vaccines don't interfere with your vaccine. There are hundreds of these studies. They're called concomitant use studies. And so that's how you know. A Reddit user asks, when did vaccines become a political talking point, and who started it? Public health is to some extent always political because it requires resources, but it doesn't have to be partisan. I think in the first year of the COVID pandemic, we didn't have anything. We didn't have antivirals till October. We didn't have monoclonal antibodies till November. We didn't have vaccines till December to try and prevent a virus that was being spread asymptomatically and could kill hundreds or thousands of people a day. So all we could do was limit human-to-human contact. So what do? We shuttered schools, we closed businesses, we restricted travel, quarantined, social distance, tested. And I think that was seen by a segment of the population as massive government overreach. And at some level, reasonably. I think we did shutter schools too long. I think we closed businesses too long, and it was done in a dictatorial top-down fashion. I think we should have involved the business community, involved the educational community in those decisions, especially for children who were special needs children who probably suffered this the most. Then the following year, when we had a vaccine, you couldn't go anywhere without your vaccine card. And that too was seen as massive political overreach. And I think with that, we leaned into the libertarian left hook. And I think we're feeling the punch of that libertarian left hook now. When RFK Jr. says that he is in the position he's in because of the COVID pandemic, I think he's right. Because with the COVID pandemic, there was a segment of this population that was really angry. He represents that anger. He represents that disdain for these public health and government agencies. Razor Beams asks, is RFK Jr. anti-vaccine, or has he ever been? RFK Jr. has been a virulent anti-vaccine activist, science denialist, and conspiracy theorist for about 20 years. For the last 10 years, he's been paid hundreds of thousands of dollars by an anti-vaccine group called Children's Health Defense. And by anti-vaccine, I mean someone who consistently puts out misinformation about vaccines that causes people to put themselves or their family members in harm's way. For 20 years, he's been shouting from the sidelines, putting out his misinformation about vaccines, scaring people about vaccines, and now he is Secretary of Health and Human Services, and he's making public policy. As a consequence, what we're seeing is that vaccines are going to become less available, less affordable, and more feared. 2025 has been a rough year. We've had more measles cases in this country than we've had in the last 30 years. We've had 3 people die from measles this year. We've had about 290 children die of influenza this year. We haven't seen a number that big since the influenza pandemic in 2009. And what has Robert F. Kennedy Jr. done about this? Not a thing. He could use his bully pulpit, his famous name, and stand up and say, vaccinate your children, but he doesn't, because he doesn't believe in vaccines. He believes that vaccines have merely replaced infectious diseases with chronic diseases, and he will do everything he can to try and lessen vaccine uptake in this country. All right, that's it. That's all the questions. Hope you learned something. Until next time.